After China announced new standardized names for 6 places in South Tibet near the disputed eastern section of the Sino-Indian boundary, India announced moves to improve its defense infrastructure with the upgrade of 2 airfields. Are we seeing a ratcheting up of tensions between the two neighbors? And last week, dozens of airplanes scheduled to fly to the Chinese city of Chengdu had to be diverted after drones were sighted flying in the clearance protection zone near the airport. We ask whether the resultant call for a total ban on these unmanned vehicles is a step too far. Welcome to The Point. I'm Li Xin. The Chinese Ministry of Civil Affairs on 13th of April announced new standardized names for 6 places in South Tibet near the disputed eastern section of the Sino-Indian boundary, which is referred to as Arunachal Pradesh in India. Some have suggested this is revenge against India for inviting the 14th Dalai Lama a week earlier to visit the area. China reiterates it is exercising its lawful rights in publicly releasing these names. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lu Kang explained reasoning behind the announcement.
These names are passed down by ethnic minority groups like the Menba and Zhang, who have long been living and working in the region, and they've been calling these places as such for generations. These names reflect from another angle that China's territorial claim over South Tibet is supported by clear evidence in terms of history, culture and administration.
The spokesperson for the Indian Ministry of External Affairs, Gopal Bagle, has said, however, assigning invented names to the towns of your neighbor does not make illegal territorial claims legal, and that Arunachal Pradesh is and will always be an integral part of India. Shortly after the statement, India also announced moves to improve its defense infrastructure with the upgrade of 2 airfields. So exactly what's the reason behind China's renaming of these places right now, and what message does China want to send? Joining me in Washington, D.C. is Professor M.D. Nalapat from Manipal University, and in Shanghai, Mr. Wang Peng, Assistant Research Fellow from the China Institute of Fudan University. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Professor Nalapat, let me come to you first. What is your reaction to China's announcement of renaming these 6 places?
Well, I'd like to point out that so far as India is concerned, we don't see that there's any dispute about Arunachal Pradesh. It is a part of India, and as Gopal Bagle correctly said, it will be part of India. So for us, frankly, this does not change the situation on the ground at all. And therefore, from our point of view, it's almost a non-issue, for the simple reason that any country is welcome to put whatever names they like on whatever bits of territory of other countries there is, but it's not going to affect the situation on the ground. Although, of course, we do believe that as 2 very large neighbors who should work closely with each other, it's very important that India and China function together in a way that promotes mutual harmony rather than mistrust.
And Mr. Wang, what is your understanding of the reasoning from the Chinese government to issue these standardized names? Is it really a non-issue, and are we really making, or is the Chinese government making a big deal out of nothing?
Well, I can only half agree with the professor because we say to resolve this problem, we must face the truth that there are really border disputes between China and India in this region. And if you look at the maps produced by the third party, you will know that they are labeled as disputed lands here. That's the first thing. That China renamed these names as a symbol to make this problem as significant for each other, for both China and India to recognize and try to solve it. So this is a basic attitude. Third, second, we can see that since recent years, more and more Indian immigrants came to this region, and so China we say we name those cities and places according to the local guys, their pronunciation. So this is a very humanic action to respect the locals, the native speakers' rights, their human rights. So I think this is very important.
Mr. Nalapat, now some people are saying this is really indeed a response to the 14th Dalai Lama's visit to that place. As I mentioned, India insisted to invite the 14th Dalai Lama to visit the areas of China-India borders amid protests from China, arguing that there is nothing political about the visit and no color should be added. What do you think is the real situation here?
You know, I think the point is that we in India and our old friends in China look upon the same thing and see something entirely different. In India, for example, we have something like 400,000 what we call God men or holy men. I mean, every town, almost most villages, has somebody who's a holy person there. So for us, the Dalai Lama is one among the many hundreds of thousands of God men that are there in the country. So it's frankly, it's again no big deal that he is going to a part of our country. It's not a big deal for us. Now, you know, my Chinese friend was talking in terms of history. It's true that this is based on the Chinese dispute is based on the McMahon Line, and the McMahon Line was drawn by the British. But the Chinese have had the same kind of a border arrangement with Myanmar, and the relations with Myanmar improved a lot when China very generously and voluntarily said they will recognize the McMahon Line on the Sino-Myanmar border. So we also look forward to our Chinese friends recognizing the McMahon Line on the India-China border, because quite frankly, the benefits to India and to China of very strong cooperation in the 21st century are overwhelmingly large.
Mr. Wang, what is your response to that? And also, why is China particularly concerned this time by the visit of Dalai Lama to this area?
Yes, we have heard many explanations that there's nothing related to Dalai Lama. However, what is true that China's renaming those places could be regarded as a polite warning about the Dalai Lama's unexpected visit to Indians controlled this territory. We call it Zhangnan territory. I think it's natural. It's easy to understand that if we come to Kashmir and some Chinese government officials or officers came to the territory controlled by Pakistan, and we say, no, there is nothing related to Pakistan or to China, that or China did not choose the sides between India and Pakistan in the Kashmir issue. Will New Delhi trust that? Will New Delhi accept this explanation? So we know that the China has repeatedly emphasized that the Tibetan issue is the core interest of China, China's national interest. So as the China's friendly country, I think it's reasonable for India to show the basic respect to China in this issue. And as the professor said, yes, we should build the future China-Indian cooperation on the basis of mutual trust and cooperation.
Mr. Nalapat, do you want to respond to that?
No, I would only like to say that, so far as India and China are concerned, quite frankly, so far as the Dalai Lama is concerned, I mean, he's been in India for a long time, from 1959 onwards. Now, I've gone to China many times, and recently I visited Tibet also, and I don't think there's any doubt at all that that Tibet is part of China. I mean, successive prime ministers in India have said very clearly that Tibet is part of China. Now, I think China is a very big, strong and powerful country. I was the first scholar to call China the next superpower. That was about 13 years ago. And I frankly can't believe that one single monk, Buddhist monk, who's come to India in '59 and is staying here since that time, although he travels to Europe half the time and to America half the time, I don't believe he can do any damage to China. So the reality situation is, I think the Chinese are quite strong to tackle any such problem, and I do hope that they will tackle it in a way which does not affect relationships between India and China, because we have so much to gain from each other. India is a $300 billion market for China. And China is a huge partner for India in infrastructure, in electricity, in telecom. Geopolitically, the two of us have similar views on so many issues. If you look at UN voting, if you look at WTO, if you look at the UN Security Council, India supported China even in 1962. When we were fighting with China on the border, we simultaneously said China must become the permanent member of the UN Security Council. So I don't think that one individual out of, as I said, 400,000 godmen in India should be allowed to create this much of damage to relations between the two giants of Asia.
Well, the problem is he is not an ordinary monk, but rather is considered by a political figure by China. And when he goes around, he is not really preaching religious preaching, but also talk about separatism, making Tibet an independent country. And that, in China's eyes, is a matter of core interest.
Well,
so it's not really one person not being able to make some kind of damage. And I would like to also to point out that the Indian government has actually made commitments that the Dalai Lama is not allowed to conduct separatist activities on Indian soil.
That's right.
So by inviting the Dalai Lama, and especially this time guided by a government minister, this is definitely different from previous visits by the Dalai Lama in that area. Is India backtracking from previous policies on Tibet by the invitation this time?
Well, I would not say so. The minister went there because he's from Arunachal Pradesh and he's a Buddhist. So he regards the Dalai Lama as a spiritual leader. So that's why he's there. And frankly, that is the reason why he's there. So there's no other reason attached to that. As far as so-called Tibetan independence is concerned, the side firmly opposes that. Those Tibetans who have been lobbying for Tibetan independence, if they go out of line, they are sent out of the country. Many of them go to Australia, they go to the United Kingdom, they go to the US, but they're not allowed to continue such activities in India. I would say that the Chinese side must agree that Indian side has been very, very strong in ensuring that on the territory of India, there is no talk of Tibetan independence whatsoever. And the Dalai Lama himself has got to be very careful about this. And if he's not careful, the Indian government is going to take very firm steps. So I reiterate, it's very important for India, as it's important for China, that the two of us cooperate together. And it will be a tragedy if third countries are allowed to make us fight each other.
Mr. Wan, yeah, we just have about 30 seconds. Do you want to make a concluding remark here?
Well, in the Dalai Lama issue, not only me, I'm afraid many Chinese people and experts would agree that India has taken something that we call the dual standard actions, that in public they accept that the importance of China-Indian relations, and they agree with China, and they also make the promise that we will not allow Dalai Lama to take India as the basement, to take any kind of separatism anti-China. However, in the level of actions, they do provide a lot of opportunities, such as this event, that officially inviting Dalai Lama to visit the disputed land. This invitation itself was has already put sand in the wheel of China-Indian relations. That's the result.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We would have to leave it there. That was Professor M.D. Nalapat from Manipal University and Mr. Wang Peng from Fudan University. Thank you very much. And here is my first point. Now, since last year, Sino-Indian relations have indeed witnessed some major obstacles. One was India's attempt to join the nuclear supply group, and the other was trying to put Masood Azhar, the leader of a militant group in Pakistan, onto the UN blacklist. Now, China's position has been that it did not agree to either for technical reasons, although these were multilateral decisions not just made by China. There is always room for talks, for negotiations to resolve these issues. Now, these two incidents were then, however, blown out of proportion by India, especially the Indian media, becoming a major hindrance to bilateral ties. The renaming of these 6 places in South Tibet is just a first signal from China, reminding the Indian side not to go further down the wrong path. But if the Indian side insists on doing that, I'm afraid more names will be changed in that region. You're watching The Point. I'll be back right after this. The commercial unmanned aerial vehicles, more commonly known as drones, is gaining momentum in China. However, the application of drones in a variety of sectors also comes with side effects. On April the 17th and 18th, dozens of airplanes scheduled to fly to the Chinese city of Chengdu had to land at alternative airports after drones were sighted flying in the clearance protection zone. What makes the drones so popular, and what measures should be carried out to minimize their side effects? Joining me today is Professor Yang Yuguang from the China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation and Mr. Seth Kaplan, Managing Partner of Airline Weekly. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Mr. Yang, first of all, other than media and consumer entertainment, drones have been more widely applied to a variety of non-traditional sectors, including agriculture and education in China. What are the reasons behind the popularity of commercial drones in the Chinese market?
Well, yes, the unmanned air vehicle has already become a very huge industry in China, not only in China but also in the whole world. I think that it is due to the development of technologies, make it more cheap and more easy to be used. For instance, the material processing technology and even the parts of the unmanned air vehicle can be made by 3D printing, and also due to the rapid development of the electronics, the chips on the UAV becomes more and more cheap, and also more easy to be controlled. You can even control a very small UAV by your mobile phone on the and also you can even find AVA sold as toys in the supermarket. So I believe it is because of the technologies, the development make it more cheap and more popular. On the other hand, there are also other reasons. You see there are concrete demands to the use of UAV, for instance, such as the after earthquake in Japan in 2008, the survey and reconnaissance of the Fukushima, the heavily polluted area, can only be surveyed by the robots and the UAV. But also with the development, more and more photographers and other people use the UAV as a very powerful tool. So I think on both sides, from the manufacturing and also from the daily usage, it become a more great industry.
Mr. Kaplan, the drone market has been experiencing a boost lately with the compound, for instance, with the compound annual growth rate of over 120%, according to market research firm International Data Corporation. China's civil aerial photography drone shipments are expected to reach 5.5 million by 2020, with consumer-level drones exceeding 3 million. Now, where does China stand among its global counterparts in the commercial drone market?
Yeah, well, China's an important part of the market. The United States has more of the market than any other single country, but by no means the majority of the market. China has 15–20% of the market, something like that. So obviously, given those global numbers that you mentioned, significant numbers of drones in China. And this, by the way, has really taken the world by surprise. The Economist reported not long ago that back in 2010, the Federal Aviation Administration in the United States expected that by the year 2020, so a few years from now, there might be 15,000 drones in the United States. Instead, more than that number are sold every month just in the United States. And so we're talking about very big numbers all over the world, and indeed in China.
Now, Seth, despite the convenience drones have brought to people's daily life, incidents like a lost drone crashing onto the White House lawn in 2015 have also caused concerns. Some say a drone capable of delivering a package to your door will also be able to be capable of delivering a small bomb. How are concerns of malicious uses of drones being addressed in the United States?
Yeah, you're right. And if you think about it, this is not so different from manned aircraft in the sense that, we all fly around on commercial jets. They do a lot of good for the world, but we're all well aware also of the exceptions to that when commercial jets have been used as weapons, such as in the terrorist attacks in the United States back in 2001, killed thousands of people. So yeah, it's a combination of regulations and education in the U.S. and most countries. There's a requirement to register drones. Having said that, not all are registered. China is engaging in an effort to crack down on illegal drones that aren't registered and that aren't complying with rules. Typically, a drone is not allowed to fly within a certain distance of an airport. It's not allowed to fly above a certain altitude, a rather low altitude of 120 meters or so, depending on the country. And commercial pilots are being educated. There are new guidelines about what to do in terms of looking out for drones and reporting them if they see them doing something wrong. Beyond that, obviously intelligence agencies are all engaged in this new threat that exists, because as you said, certainly just as it's become easier to do all these good things with drones, indeed, when people get their hands on them with bad intentions, just as with commercial aircraft, just as with the internet or other kinds of things that do a lot of good in the world, important to combat those threats. Governments are doing it,
sure.
And airlines too are asking their pilots to do what they can.
Well, sometimes it's just pure accidents that can be caused. Mr. Yang, now one common concern is of drones wandering into protected airspace. For instance, earlier in April, as I mentioned, dozens of airplanes scheduled to fly to the city of Chengdu had to land at alternative airports after drones were sighted flying in the protection zone. Now, the Chinese government is also aware of the problem and has rolled out some corresponding regulations. Here is a very quick look. Now, the Civil Aviation Administration of China introduced provisional regulations on the operation of drones. Looser restrictions were unveiled for rural or less populated areas, while major cities such as Beijing and Shanghai have much stricter regulations, especially for drones weighing more than 7 kilos. Now, in Beijing, there is a no-fly zone in most part of the city inside the 6 ring road, including the 3 airports. However, industry players complain that the restrictions will contain the development of drones. How do you respond to this?
Well, I agree to have more restrictions to this kind of activity. You know that every day we take airplanes to go to everywhere of the world, but still, although the air flight has already been very practical, but still because the airplane is a very complex machine, the more complex it is, the more possible to have some malfunction, and it is a very fragile to some extent. It's a very fragile machine, and even not only the UAV but also the birds near the airport can cause very serious problems to the safety of the airplane. So I think I agree with our guest in DC that we should not allow the users of the UAV to come too close to the airport and also flying too high to the some area. And also I think this will not influence the development of this industry, because there are plenty of space for these kind of users to use their UAV.
Mr. Copeland, drones disrupting flights is a headache for global airline companies. What are some of the countermeasures being taken by airline companies, in your knowledge?
Yeah, you're right. And to some degree, we don't know exactly what kind of damage they could do, because thankfully, we haven't yet seen a disaster, middle air collision that's perhaps brought down a commercial airline, or airliners, commercial airplanes are built to sustain certain kinds of things. A bird strike, for example, typically isn't going to bring down an airplane, but a drone that's full of metal and so forth, we don't know exactly what it would do. There was an incident in outside London where a British had what seemed to be a mid-air collision with a drone where its nose cone was damaged and the plane survived it. But it is a combination of all the regulations that we've spoken about, and just with continuing to educate pilots to be on the lookout for these threats. The problem is, I mentioned the incident in London. In that case, the drone was just flying so far above the altitude where drones are typically allowed to to fly that, you know, with everything else that pilots have to think about, you know, it's really a last line of defense, the pilot having to address this. You know, you really want these to be controlled through the regulations, through air traffic control, obviously, identifying if something goes on. You know, what happened in Chengdu, I mean, look, in the end, at least they kept everybody safe there. But you really hate for it to have to come to that. In that case, oh, you had tens of thousands of people inconvenienced, but at least, you know, their lives not threatened. But you could imagine worse happening. And so good to see airlines and authorities getting out in front of this, but the threat is far from over. Have to continue what we've been talking about, kind of this two-pronged approach, letting the industry develop because it does a lot of good, but you know, preventing the worst.
And especially when the drones are getting more and more powerful, also, yeah, with the smaller engine and possibly flying higher and faster. Mr. Yang, finally, what we discussed today reflects how the technology development in aviation is moving pretty fast. On the other hand, China is also witnessing great achievements in the aerospace sector, and today, by accident, marks the second National Day of Space Flight. And this year's celebration will focus on the applications of space technology in economic and social development. What's the timeline for China to become one of the world's aerospace leading countries, let's say?
Well, the China government has published the two versions of the white book of China aerospace in these years. And because in the future we want to go to not only a big country but also an advanced country in the world, so we still have many things to do. We will build our own space laboratory in space, and also we will have more in deep space probes, such as the Chang'e 5 lunar mission will have the sample return from the moon this year, by the end of this year. And next year or the year after next, we will have the first soft landing on the far side of the moon, which has never been done by other countries before. And for these years, we also have more satellites dedicated in scientific research, such as dark matter exploration and so on.
Wow, indeed, a lot of things to watch out for. Many things. We have to leave it there, gentlemen. Now, that was Professor Yang Yuguang from the China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation, and Mr. Seth Kaplan, Managing Partner of Airline Weekly. Thank you very much. And here is my last point. Technological development, the way it is used makes all the difference. When cars first put in an appearance, for example, some places stipulated that a man with a red flag had to walk in front of the vehicle to make it safe for pedestrians to use the roads. Eventually, of course, a set of rules was formulated, and nowadays the rules of the road do a pretty good job of ensuring that car driving is, in the main, safe. Of drones, people are testing their limits, and common sense should tell us that they shouldn't be used near airports or near high security areas. So although some have called for a total ban on drones, I think it is a somewhat lazy way of solving problems. Only by trial and error will we find out how to make the best use of new technologies. That's all for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle ThePix, and you can watch our previous shows on the CGTN channel of YouTube. Click on the playlist and look for The Point with Liu Xin. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow at the same time.